headlines on RT International. The White House vows to overrule a judge who has blocked Donald Trump's controversial travel restrictions as the rift in America widens further. Also, we examine the new trend for aggressive protest tactics by so-called liberal youth. Sanctions on Iran and a review of Cuba relations. U.S. foreign policy signals its turn away from the days of Barack Obama.
The world would be a better place if we could have a different relationship between Western Europe, the United States, and Russia.
RT speaks to the candidate chosen by Donald Trump to be the EU ambassador, who's currently being slammed by top European parliamentarians. Thanks for joining us here on RT International. Midday now in Moscow. We have your latest worldwide news headlines. And resistance to Donald Trump's travel ban has moved to a new level after his executive order was put on hold by a court in Seattle. A judge there has issued a nationwide block, which means that people from the affected countries, which are mostly Muslim, can now apply for re-entry. However, the White House aims to file an emergency stay on the court's decision, arguing the restrictions will make the country safer. Now, Trump's latest moves here, the last move, I suppose, in the last week or so, sparking protests, resulting in all sorts of legal challenges in several states. So let's have a look at the map, if we can. We'll show you some of the hotspots here, North America, the map for you now. Ultimately, you can see where the hotspots are mainly centered along the coastline, strongholds on the upper northeastern seaboard here, New York and Washington, D.C., and in the northwest coast as well. Above California, Seattle, Washington as well. That's where the block on the travel restrictions came from. However, it now appears that ultimately California here is leading the revolt against the president's policy, with protests taking different forms there. As Guyane Chichikan now reports.
San Francisco police suspend ties with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which had the police working with the FBI for years in counterterrorism efforts. San Francisco authorities say they want to review the guidelines which previously authorized local police officers to gather intelligence on people engaged in First Amendment activities, such as religious services, protests, and political assemblies. With Trump in office, civil rights groups and members of the Muslim community applaud the decision.
Joint terrorism task forces have had a chilling effect on the First Amendment rights of Arab and Muslim communities throughout the country. In the face of ever-increasing repression by the federal government, we applaud local agencies' decision to suspend participation in the JTTF.
This is the latest move by San Francisco to try to disengage from the federal government under the Trump administration, especially in regard to the president's directives on immigration. Earlier this week, the city's mayor, police chief, and sheriff wrote a letter to the Department of Homeland Security saying they had no intention to comply with the president's executive orders on immigration and go after undocumented residents. If California governor's speech earlier in January is any indication, it may not be just San Francisco.
In California, immigrants are an integral part of who we are and what we become.
Some Californians demand a so-called Cal-exit as they begin to gather petitions in order to put an initiative on the ballot which could lead to America's most populous state becoming a separate country. Only 31% of Californians voted for Donald Trump in the election, which indicates just how many people there stand against him. The question now is how far Californians are prepared to take their resistance. In Washington, I'm Guyane Chichikan, RT.
Meanwhile, an American congresswoman has dubbed Wednesday's protests at the University of Berkeley, which turned very violent, quote, a beautiful sight. They broke out shortly before a senior editor of the news website Breitbart was due to give a speech against so-called sanctuary campuses, which offer protection to undocumented students.
We have seen demonstrations, and I think we've already talked about that around the country. Young people at Berkeley protesting against this unconstitutional order. And so as we encourage our young people to get involved, I thought it was a beautiful sight.
The The riots against the planned event at the campus have raised concerns in the media over free speech. Some say the protests are somewhat ironic, given that the university considers itself a beacon of free speech.